Hi everyone, I'm Alyssa. I'm a cartoonist who came from the animation industry, and I've spent the past year locking in and studying comics. So if you're new to making comics or just want to hang out, let's hop in and talk about comic paneling. So since my background is in film and animation, I thought that a lot of storytelling is about timing and things moving. But in a comic, you only have static images. So I had a lot of questions, like how do you show time and motion? How do you tell a story? So looking for answers, I found what was kind of like the comic making Bible, which is Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. In it, he talks about something called closure, which is when us humans take a look at something that's incomplete and we fill in the gaps ourselves. We make assumptions and find meaning between these two pictures that are put side by side. That's where time happens, not always just in the panels, but in the gutter between them. This is actually really similar to film editing. It reminded me of something we talked about in school. There was this Russian filmmaker that did an experiment, juxtaposing unrelated clips side by side. By putting them next to each other, it gave them meaning that they didn't have alone. You can push this pretty far, but the more different things are between the two images, the more work your audience needs to do to understand what's going on. So most commonly, comics use a variety of different techniques. Let's get academic for a moment and take a look at McCloud's examples. This first one is called moment to moment. It leaves very little up to the reader. It's like frames of an animation. It almost feels slow to read because you're spending a lot of space on the page dedicated to this one idea. If space between the panels is time, then having two panels side by side that are very similar and not presenting much new information feels like a lot of time. You might not want to draw your entire comic this way, but imagine what kind of effect it could have if you do want to give emphasis to something like this. Next, there's action to action, which is most common in American comics, at least in the 90s when Scott wrote this book. It kind of works like key storytelling poses. There's an A and a B with an obvious change between the two, focusing on one subject and how they move. It flows easily because the reader can fill in the blanks, and it quickly communicates speed. See how in this middle example, there needs to be a third frame? That's because there needs to be more time or real estate on the page to tell the story, where as a whack of a baseball bat or a sudden car crash happens really quickly and doesn't need that extra time. Next, we have subject to subject. Here, the reader is starting to do a little work. From these examples, it seems like the transition gives a bit of a punctuation to an idea. Whether it's the end of a scene, a punchline to a joke, or maybe just the end of a train of thought, one frame is the question, and the other is the answer. It causes the audience to assume something. The slasher is coming, we don't see him strike, but our question of what happened is answered. Of course, this can also be a tool. Your audience makes an assumption that you could then use to set up a joke or a dramatic reveal later on. Next, which might feel very comfortable and familiar to filmmakers, is a scene-to-scene transition. It crosses over space and time, just like a scene transition in a movie would. Wondering, how can I do a montage, cross-cut, show that 10 years have passed, show that your characters are in a new location? This is how. Next is aspect to aspect. Like how I was saying before that using up space on the page emphasizes something and gives time to it. Aspect to aspect often has an ambient vibe to it, setting up a location based on what your senses would observe. McCloud mentions in the book that this technique wasn't as common in America as it was in Japan at the time, which makes a lot of sense when you think about how Ghibli movies are. There's so much breath and ambience given to the scenes that aren't really in American movies. There's just this different sensibility in Japanese media, and I think it's greatly inspired artists all over the world today. So in many comics that I've read, aspect to aspect is used a lot and to great effect. It really does add a layer of depth and cinematicness to the story. So for this type, it's mostly about transitioning between things in relatively the same location. You're setting up the mood for a scene or moment. The last type that McCloud mentions is non sequitur, which means there's no logical connection between the two panels whatsoever. This doesn't mean there isn't a connection. It just might not be clear at first. There might be a pattern or mood or message that an artist is trying to get across, even if that message is confusion. It's important that all of these techniques are used with intention in order to communicate clearly. It doesn't mean that you're going to sit down and be like, yes, I think I'll use aspect to aspect here. It's more like when you're thumbnailing your story, You want to think, what is the best way to communicate what I'm trying to say? How much time or emphasis does this idea need? And how do I need to support the idea? Do I need any kind of establishment of the environment or mood of the scene? Now that we're understanding all of that, let's take a look at some actual comics. Paneling can be done in a hugely wide variety of ways. Personally, I think the most successful comics break the mold of strictly using equally sided square boxes for everything, but there's a rich history of comic strips in comics online and in print today that still use that format. On the flip side, there are also comics that are completely borderless. There seems to be an understanding of space and their placement on the page that makes the story easy to follow, but there's no frame around each idea. My partner, who also comes from animation, was collecting this run of Nightwing while it was coming out, and this art is super cool. There's these pages that feel almost like animation frames. And yeah, I guess you can say that these pages are panelless. The framed panels don't have to be restrictive. Most comics do use them after all. And sometimes the frames and the amount of decoration that they have can add a lot to the mood of the panel. In Hat Atelier, Shirahama Kamomi is often making these beautiful frames and scrolls that hold the panels. She overlaps her characters outside the panel's shape, giving it so much organic feeling. It flows in a beautiful and impactful way. She's using these moments as a point of emphasis. Not every moment needs it, but when she does use it, it's that much more impactful. There's a really great video that goes over manga paneling and how awesome Shirahama Kamomi is, and I'll link it in the description if you want to check it out. It's a good one. Another way is to organize your panels in a long horizontal format. This type of page is different from the others in a book where a majority is a more typical type of paneling. Taylor Robin does this quite a few times in Hunger's Bite, and I think these pages do a great job at setting the scene, showing a character's memories, and just being super beautiful to look at. Just a few more examples. I want to shout out Left Star and The Strange Occurrence, because even though the paneling is pretty standard boxes, it's a good reminder that it's not always about the panel, but what's inside it that matters. The story has interesting world building and a meaningful, relatable main character. So don't let yourself get bogged down by designing overly complicated pages. You can tell an amazing and beautiful story as long as your intentions come across clearly. Lastly, I want to take a look at the opening of Roaming for a minute. This book's paneling is phenomenal, and Gillian Tamaki's work really stands out to me as something to strive for. Really thoughtful use of paneling to take a simple scene and make it feel special and true to life. These pages really put everything together. Unique paneling, perfectly combined with a simplicity that lets the contents of the panel shine. There's also shot work and composition happening within the panel. Gillian frames the characters from unexpected angles with a level of specificity that I really admire. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and that you had a lot of fun, and hopefully it was inspirational or taught you something that you didn't already know. Comment below the name of a comic that you think has really good paneling. I'd love to take a look at some more recommendations. And hopefully in the future, I can do some videos talking about my process, going from idea generation to thumbnails to comic panels. So subscribe if you're looking forward to that, and see you next time.